Welcome back to the program, and thank you so much for keeping it KBC Channel 1 this far. My name is Samuel Njoroge. Today in the dailies, precisely the Daily Nation, we had two stories touching on teenage pregnancies, and this has become a worrying trend, and we need to have a conversation about probably not teenage pregnancies and reproductive health, especially among adolescents, as a secluded topic. But let's link it up with other factors, key among them education, because children within that age bracket should be in school, should be getting education. How can education play a role in making sure that we avert teenage pregnancies in this country? I will not be having this discussion alone. I have a panel of a lady and a gentleman in studio this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
We're doing very well.
You're doing okay. I'll start with my immediate left. We've got Violet Murunga. Yes, Violet Murunga works with Africa. Let me get the name. Just don't worry. Here we go. Yes, she works for the Africa Institute for Development Policy. Africa Institute for Development Policy. Welcome to the program. And we've got Albert Obbuyi, who works for the Center for Adolescent Study. Welcome to the program too. So 20511 is our SMS line. Engagers, let us know what your questions or feedback is on this show, and of course on the topic that we are discussing beginning right now. And I will start with you, Albert, in terms of now that you work with adolescent, the bracket mostly, when it comes to teenage pregnancies in this country, where do you usually get it wrong in tackling that problem?
I think there are several reasons why teenage pregnancy continues to be a problem in this country. And one of them could be that we do not have a structured way of providing education, education around delaying having sex amongst adolescents. But also we do not have, because of different reasons, at the family level, we do not have forums where parents are able to talk to their children about sexuality and reproductive health. And all these factors, because of collapsing structures that traditionally were used to provide education, and because we are not providing education in the curriculum, they tend to leave a leeway for children growing up without the requisite skills that would enable them to make good choices about their sexuality.
And when we talk about sex education, Violet, coming to you, what are we looking at? What is sex education?
Well, what I know right now from the evidence, we're talking about comprehensive sexuality education in schools. It's quite a controversial topic.
Yes.
It's been in the media every so often. I think the Ministry of Health is trying to do something about it, but it's really about, it's a misunderstood topic because it's about teaching children in schools about abstinence, the importance of that, but also about how to prevent themselves from getting pregnant or STIs if they do choose to become sexually active, giving them the tools to be able to make those decisions about becoming sexually active and how to do it safely. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And does the conversation begin when you get to, or do you wait until your child gets to adolescence for you to have this conversation, or when is the right time to start having it?
I think because of the nature of our culture, we do not start to talk to our children early enough. But we know, because of growing up, because of changing diets and all these things, that children are starting to mature much more earlier. We need to start addressing issues that children are facing much more earlier. And when we say earlier, we can start to talk to children even as early as at the kindergarten level to be able to identify which these are the body parts, this is unsafe touching, this is how you relate with people within your environment, and start building this conversation in a way that appreciates age, in a way that appreciates culture, in a way that is sensitive to the cultural context in which children are growing up. So the earlier we start to talk about sexuality, the better for children. By the time we are getting to adolescence, particularly in the ages between 10 and 14, girls are starting to have issues around menstruation, girls are starting to have issues around relationship with boys, and this conversation should already have been initiated at a much more earlier stage. Now, two platforms are available for us. As people who live with these children, we should start the conversation at the family level. But as people, as teachers who spend a lot of time with children, we need to use part of that time to engage children with this conversation. But all other forums, including churches, should be used to provide information in a friendly way, in a way that would enable children to delay, in a way that would enable children to make good choices for themselves as they grow up.
It's usually, as you say, it involves so much.
Yeah.
But breaking the ice, especially for so many parents, for so many caregivers, for so many guardians, is usually the hardest. You know, taking that first step towards having this conversation. So, if you may, Violet, kindly advise us on how do you start a conversation on sexuality with your kid?
Well, I might throw that ball to Mr. Obbuyi because he is working more closely with adolescents in school. Because for us, we deal mostly at the evidence level. What I can tell you about the evidence is that it shows that, like Albert said, family connectedness, parental connectedness, community issues are very key and instrumental in advancing adolescent sexual and reproductive health. So how a parent talks to a child one-on-one is really about understanding what the child is doing, where the child is at every moment, because parental monitoring actually is a very strong link to good adolescent sexual and reproductive health. But I don't know, maybe Albert can add to that.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's very difficult to respond to this question because there is no standard formula of talking about issues that relate to growing up for children. However, I think there are efforts that have been made to develop tools that can enable children to learn through formal education, but also there are people who even create materials, especially for younger children, to play with, and which can also start to provide an area for starting to do a conversation on sexuality. But as children grow up, we need to formalize this conversation between adults and children, respecting children and trying to bridge the gap that is existing between adults and children so that people can be much more freer, creating safer environment for children to talk about issues that generally are considered as taboo, and building a safe environment both at the household level and within the school environment so that children can volunteer information about what's happening about them. But more significantly, we tend to wait until when there are problems, when probably a child has become pregnant or somebody has had an unsafe abortion, to be able to start discussing, and in most cases in a very negative way. But I think effective discussion, good education, and providing information on sexuality much more earlier is a better vaccine, is a better way of preventing these problems. And the best solution, therefore, is to initiate this discussion at the earliest opportunity and at the earliest moment. Yeah.
Coming to Violet, in terms of evidence, what are the missing links in the chain or in the process of growth for children into adolescence? What are the missing links that are making, issues like teenage pregnancies, their sexual reproductive health, they're not able to grasp that quite well? What is causing that?
Okay, what I can tell you from the evidence, what you find is that education is really key. Right now, only just over half of primary school students transition into secondary school. And when you look at the data, you can see that girls who have secondary education and higher are 3 times more likely, less likely to be pregnant or to have a child than girls without an education. And girls with secondary school and higher, or women with secondary school and higher, marry 5 years later than women without education. And marriage is a very key determinant of also how early you get pregnant. The less education you have, the more likely, of course, you will start childbearing early, and that has impacts on you in terms of development. Yeah, so you know, so we need to push for secondary education, especially for girls. Girls in some counties are quite disadvantaged in terms of transitioning to secondary school, and we find that's protective. Yeah.
Let's get to an incident that is very recent. You know, we're all talking about Project X.
Yeah.
And everyone seems to have an opinion as to what is happening with that particular, I don't know whether to call it a project. We've called it Project X. But then, Albert, do you feel as a society we are so reactive as opposed to proactive in dealing with some of these issues?
Well, I think one of the things that needs to be appreciated is that adolescence is an age for growing up, for testing new things, for experimenting, for doing all sorts of things. I mean, we all have gone through this process. And it doesn't mean that when adolescents are experimenting, they intend to deliberately offend society. However, the way our society is structured is such that parents are protective. They want the best for their children, and they're very careful and also scared if they think that children are going to get into things that can be dangerous for them. So this reaction is quite understandable from the parents' point of view. However, it does ignore the fact that children are growing up. Children do not have sufficient information about some particular behaviors, and they need this information. Children need guidance, and largely parents are not having adequate time to spend with their children, and therefore children are left to their own devices, you know, to find ways of entertaining themselves, ways of getting information, ways of, you know, building relationships within society. And so it's a wider societal issue that must not be restricted to this group of children, but generally to review, are we having opportunities within our society to be able to stay with the children, to provide them with the information, to guide them, to find mentors who can build them and to guide them, and to also appreciate that, yeah, okay, they are growing up. However, if they go into this direction, this could be a little bit dangerous for them, and we need to support them into this discussion. But they are also rational, they are also thinking human beings, and we must appreciate that. So they are not just objects within society that must be taken into this and that direction and be guided. We must give children room to grow and to learn from some of the things that they are doing. So I think there are opportunities for us to plan well in advance of how we want to respond to the needs of our children, other than responding to a scenario or an incident that happens.
And really, to add to Albert, I believe that and from the evidence showing that community and community structures, like what is in place for young people to actually have fun, interact with each other, do have constructive fun. I think maybe to a large extent this is missing, and in areas where young people are disadvantaged, they're even worse off. You know, like things like clubs where young people can join in, interact with people of the same age group, but doing useful things that have an impact in their future development. I think, you know, this is it's a sense of being idle almost, that you would be so fascinated by something as, you know, Project X. And not to, you know, bash Project X organizers,
yes,
because there's a demand. I mean, they're just feeding a demand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is where I love that the discussion has gotten to that point. They are feeding a demand. So it is not like they're initiating something, they're simply responding to something that is already on the ground. Isn't that an issue that we should be discussing, Albert? The demand, as you said, they're rational human beings. They're not vacuums, they have minds of their own. The demand, what triggers this particular demand?
Well, it's difficult to tell what triggers this kind of demand, but I think it may be necessary to look at what's happening in a much more broader way. One of them is what opportunities society is providing for young people, for example, for entertainment and for recreation and for skills and for talent growth and searching. And if we broadly look at how do we tap into these talents and opportunities for young people in a more structured way, in a more organized way, that could take their energy away from some of these things and help them grow into responsible adults as well. So that we can do from society, away from where they spend most of their time in the school, but also we can tap into their skills within the school system and enable them to use their skills in a much more meaningful way. And we must also think beyond coming out of school, because it's a huge population of young people who have just completed fourth grade and who really are not engaged in meaningful activities. So what opportunities is society providing for young people at that time? And there's a whole range of things that we can do, starting to think about business incubation opportunities for young people after school or even within school, starting to think about platforms for innovation and creativity for young people, starting to think about mentorship, starting to think about apprenticeship and attachments for young people. Even when they are within school, the free time they have, how do we structure these things so that young people are continuously engaged to build their skills and to build their capacities, so that by the time they're going out into society, they are able to be a good fit for the market in terms of job creation and employment.
And in terms of level of connectedness, Violet, when you look at the family, the connection therein between the parents and the kids is wanting. It's a conversation we've had for a very long time. If you look at how these kids fit into society, it's very peer-driven. So the conversation will be generated from amongst themselves, right? It only tells you that we've got missing links within the chain. How do we fix this?
Well, how to fix it is the big question. I think you need to look into what other societies are doing, or other countries within the African region, or even other communities within Kenya who are successful, or even looking at the young people, because it's a proportion of young people who are maybe behaving in ways that is worrying. There's a proportion that also are behaving appropriately. So what is it about them that is helping them to pass through and avoid these inappropriate kind of situations? So maybe looking at those more closely and trying to define what characteristics, or what characteristics about those families or communities are enhancing those young people's lives who are not engaging in the inappropriate activities.
Yeah, but maybe young people are starting to parent also fairly early, without the skills for parenting and without the preparedness. How do they then raise up the children that they are bringing? Secondly, there are huge economic pressures on parents. For a typical family in Nairobi today, the mother goes this way, the father goes this way, and that's for the whole day. And probably the only opportunity we have to meet is is 1 or 2 hours on Saturday or Sunday,
Yeah.
and so that connection is not really there. And well, that's what society is now, because there is just so much, economic pressure on families. The ultimate factor then is that there is less time between parents and their children, and there is limited opportunities for talking, including talking about sexuality. And because previously even other people who are not your parents could talk to you about sexuality, that's no longer happening. You have your child, you have to deal with him and deal with the problems that he has. And all these different factors are contributing to a complete breakdown of opportunities for people to talk to children on growing up and sexuality.
And to add to what Albert is saying, we also have social media, which has made things very complicated. I mean, I think young people now are spending more time on social media, and as you rightly said, peer influence is quite high among young people in general. But that's also natural. I think it's natural for young people to transition from being very dependent on their parents to being more closer to their friends, which is fine. It's just how constructive and positive are those friendships, and that's linked to a broader way of dealing with the issue. Ensuring that all people go to school, ensuring that they have access to comprehensive sexuality education to make those right decisions. But yeah, using social media for positive action as well.
Yeah. I was going through some research earlier that showed if, as a parent, you do not have or you haven't established influence over your child by the time they're around 6 years old, they get to school, it will be very difficult for you to actually even sit these children down and tell them something and they get an opportunity to listen to you. When you look at our social structure right here in Kenya, and even the education sector, we've got allegations of teachers, abusing young girls, teachers abusing young boys. And there's also the question of peer influence. Amongst themselves, there's a lot that is happening. In terms of approach and dealing with this matter, Albert, how can we mend society? How can we establish, a level playing field where a good level-headed discussion can happen about sexuality and reproductive health amongst adolescents?
I think one area would be at the policy level. That as a country we need to have very clear policies, very deliberate, that we know teenage pregnancy, for example, is a huge contributor to bad performance in the education sector, and especially for girls. And we know that if girls are not going to school, this has implications for their future and for the economy of this country. And therefore, policy should be structured in such a way that it provides access to information at the earliest opportunity where children go through education. And that must be provided as an official education program that is provided within the standard schooling procedure. So that would be one way of dealing with that. Community and society must start having a dialogue amongst itself in terms of appreciating that things have changed. And there are many problems that are facing young people, including violence, including sexually transmitted infections, including HIV and AIDS. And it's an opportunity now to start appreciating that we need to start talking to our young people within all community structures, including churches and families, to be able to address these problems. Thirdly, I think there is a thinking that when you provide good education on sexuality to children at an early stage, you are essentially encouraging them. And we know from studies, and we know from programs that is not true. We know that if children are provided with information early enough, it helps them to delay, it helps them to make good choices, it helps them to transition through primary school to secondary school. And that's essentially how we can help our country and society, you know, to have good results for its youthful population.
Great. Yeah. And in terms of mentorship, Violet, can we have avenues through which we have young people being mentored into being responsible sexual beings?
Yes, absolutely. I think in school programs, in community programs, the aspect of mentorship is very important. I mean, young people need to see role models. Even in their parents, role modeling is very key in how they develop as human beings. So it's really in incorporating mentors in every aspect of a young child's or a young person's life, family, school, neighborhood, community, national level. Yeah.
And when developing a curriculum on sexual education or sex education, what should we look at? What should be the key themes that we should incorporate therein? Okay.
I think we already mentioned about providing information that is age appropriate and that is sensitive to the cultural context of the people, and that can be supported widely by society as good information. But generally we want to include information for children that looks at their growing up, understanding what's happening around their bodies, but also we want to provide information about building positive relationships amongst themselves as children who are growing up, between boys and girls. But also they need to understand the dynamics and how gender issues influence the relationships and the dynamics even within the education sector. And that's very critical, that boys and girls need to know that they can both play a critical function in the general society and in development. So that should be part of the information. But I think the more sensitive and difficult issues that people do not want to address are issues about sexuality, how children are feeling in their bodies, and they want to start building a relationship with somebody else, and what does that mean for them? Are they physically and mentally fully developed to get into this kind of situation? What are the options, and how should they deal with these options? And being able to enable children to have information on how to protect themselves against adverse outcomes that would come out of building this relationship. So how do they avoid teenage pregnancy, for example? How do they delay the age at which they start to engage in sexual activity? And finally, looking at other broader issues, including sexual violence amongst children, and being able to link them to health services and to know where can I get testing, where can I get counseling, and where can I get treatment. And this whole range of information must be structured in a logical sequence that appreciates what kind of information do you provide to a 10-year-old, and what kind of information do you provide to a 19 and 24-year-old. So it must be clearly structured, logically made, and probably informed by research and evidence and some theories. Yeah.
And when you look at social acceptance, and with then running a risk of diluting the information so much, because I'm looking at diversity of worldview when it comes to social acceptance of what will go into that curriculum, then how do we ensure that we do not dilute the information so much in the name of censorship, such that we lose meaning at the end of the day?
I think one of the things is that clearly we all cannot probably agree on the same thing, but there must be a framework, a frame from which we operate, and these are the things that we are saying. If we have these basics in providing this kind of education, I think that is a big step, because we agree on the framework. We just disagree on a few aspects of that. So long as that framework is agreeable as a country and as a society, and of course we know that these are issues that are affecting our children and society at large, and therefore that should be agreeable. How we do it, how we present that are issues that people still have to negotiate around, but I think generally we agree these are important issues that should be delivered to children.
Right.
When it is delivered by government on a standard basis, then we clearly address the issue of whether it's diluted or not. But we know this is a standard document that is used from the capital to the villages across the country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that final part, from the capital to the village, because a conversation here can be very different elsewhere, courtesy of geography and boundaries. Africa Institute for Development Policy, you must be custodians of so much research, a lot of findings when it comes to sexuality and reproductive health amongst adolescents. What are some of the most interesting facts that you've come across?
Well, I think I mentioned some of them earlier, but the other issue, we've been talking about teenage pregnancy. 1 in 5 girls in Kenya has already started childbearing, which means they're pregnant with their first child, or they already have had a birth. So that's I think that's a huge number, judging that 10 to 19-year-old children in the country, or young people, make up a quarter of the population of Kenya. Yes, so the other interesting fact is that in terms of HIV rates, you find a lot of young people making it to adolescence without even actually knowing that they have HIV, those who were born with HIV. And testing is very low among adolescents. So there's an issue there as they get to a place where they're starting to experiment with sex, and not knowing their status could actually take us back in terms of where we've come with addressing HIV in this country. And even when you look at the infection rates among adolescents, girls are so disadvantaged. I think there's a statistics from UNICEF that say that 70% of the infections among adolescents are in girls. So girls remain to be disadvantaged, and when you see the linkage with school, marriage, these issues, girls getting married early, girls not transitioning into secondary school as much as boys in some counties in this country, then you can see that we could have a problem. And even about the teenage pregnancy, we see that there's been a stagnation. The rate is still the same as it was 2009 when the same survey, the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey, was done. In 2009 and then in 2014, we see that it has not moved at all downwards. So it has stagnated, meaning that the programs we've been doing, maybe we need to change the way we are doing. We are implementing our programs, our interventions to ensure that teen pregnancy is addressed and reduced. Yeah. So those are some of the interesting facts.
So from this discussion, I gather, Albert, that the issue is not with sex. The issue is with understanding sexuality and what comes with it, right?
Absolutely. I think we must distinguish those two issues and say we are really talking about sexuality in totality.
Yes.
How people feel, how people relate to each other, how people behave with who they are. I mean, it's a whole huge mix of issues, if wider society could appreciate that sexuality is much more wider than just issues around sex, and we can engage around this conversation and help young people to understand this and to grow knowing how to protect themselves and how to live a much more meaningful life, and being able also to express their sexuality as young people, then it will be a much more happier society for many people.
Great. I love that, because you find this is a topic, as much as we're going to look into the schools and everything, it's a topic that we can have a meaningful discussion within society.
Yeah.
You know, but the same society look at family, look at church. You know, some of them will tell young people sex is evil, sex is bad, sex should, you know, and then they grow up with that kind of fear, and then they distort the concept of sexuality eventually. But as you heard from the panel this morning, the issue is not with sex. The issue is making sure that they understand sexuality and what comes with it. Your parting final words, starting with you, Violet.
With me is to ensure that young people actually get the education they want, including, or the education they need, rather, including comprehensive sexuality education, which is very key in terms of their decisions and really the sexuality decisions, and has an impact in their broader development into the future, even into employment and their social economic status in the future. Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah, Kenya has a huge youthful population today, and the time to invest in that population is now. And if we do good investments now, the country is going to reap benefits of having invested and protected the health of their young people.
Absolutely. There you have it. Understand what your child is going through. Make sure that you also understand the stage at which they are, so that you're able to have a good conversation that is able to ensure that they understand what sexuality and reproductive health is all about. Thank you so much, Albert, from the Center of Adolescent Study, and of course Violet from the Africa Institute of Development Policy. It has been a pleasure hosting you this morning. So we take a short break, but do not go anywhere. This is Good Morning Kenya. My name is Samuel Njoroge. I believe People Like Us is up next.